I mentioned a few videos ago that I have a job and it's actually in cybersecurity, so I want to comment on kernel level anti-cheat and what I kind of think about that. When Valorant first came out and it had kernel level anti-cheat, I was really spooked by that. And I've been reading a lot of comments and review bombs lately of people being upset that, oh, such and such game is collecting my driver's license or all this information about me. I don't understand why I need to share that in order to play this game. What gives? So I wanted to make a video about how I think through this stuff and the factors that I weigh. The first thing I want to do is draw a line between security and privacy. Security is a technology matter, but privacy is a legal matter. So when you're reading about invasive level, God mode, kernel anti-cheat, that's security. But when you're reading about, oh, I can't believe what's in the terms and conditions, oh, this privacy policy is ridiculous, that's privacy. And if you want to better understand what's in those huge terms that's full of legal jargon, you should really read that with a lawyer or at least someone who understands that stuff. But the reason I'm bringing up security and privacy is because I think in both those situations, the first most important question that I always ask myself is, what am I giving up or sharing or revealing about myself? And what am I getting back, or what good is that bringing to me? So in the case of the Steam store, I buy stuff off Steam all the time. And I'm basically saying it's worth it to me to share my information with Valve. They could get hacked. They could operate outside their privacy policy. They probably won't because they'll get sued, but nothing's 100%, anything's possible. Valve has a pretty good track record, but they still could get hacked. But I'm comfortable enough that the added convenience that buying stuff off Steam brings to my life, that's a trade I'm willing to make, and so I do that with them. But here's the thing, not everyone's gonna feel the same way about that. And not only do I buy stuff off Steam, I buy things off the Nintendo eShop, and off Amazon, and off eBay, and basically any site that looks halfway legit. I'm personally comfortable buying things online. Everybody's comfortable with different things. So I might be cool with it, but you might find somebody else who says, okay, yeah, I'll buy things off the Steam store, but I am not using the PlayStation Network. They get hacked constantly. They have a bad track record. I just don't trust Sony. So the Steam store I'll use, but that's where I draw the line. Other people don't feel comfortable buying online to begin with. You know, it's not that hard for me to just head over to the game store, and it's not that much time out of my day. So I'm a little bit spooked buying stuff online, so I'll just buy things out of stores, and that's what works for me. And then another person might not even have a card to begin with because they don't want the card company to see their transaction history, so they can't buy anything online, and everything they buy in store, they pay with in cash. And I like thinking of it this way because I sort of see life as a series of calculated risks, and you're making them consciously or subconsciously all the time, and you're doing it online or offline. Every time you go to a restaurant, there is some risk that the chef poisons your food, accidentally or on purpose. There is a risk that the waiter takes your card when you go to pay at the end and writes down it all and steals your card that way. But at least for me, I'm willing to live with those risks because I like having a tasty meal or a fun night out every now and again. Another classic example is cars and airplanes. They could crash, but a lot of us want that speed boost and that convenience, and so we live with the risk of getting in a car crash, although not everybody feels that way. So life is a series of calculated risks, and different people end up making choices for their lives that are wildly different. So in order to more intelligently think through what am I giving and what am I giving back, and is that worth it to me, I think the next question you're answering is, how do I find that right balance between paranoia, which another way of saying that is trusting nobody just because I can think of one theoretical harm, versus blindly trusting everybody and possibly being taken advantage of. The way I try to think through that is the next question, which is, what's the worst case nightmare scenario that I can think of? And honestly, how realistic or likely of a scenario is that? Usually the answer to that question is what's going to guide my actions and my decision making. With Valve, they could get hacked and I could lose my card, but that's annoying, but not the worst thing in the world, and I think it's exceedingly unlikely. So I buy things off the Steam store. When it comes to getting poisoned at a restaurant, that's a much, much higher potential harm, but again, I think the likelihood of that happening is so low that I go to restaurants without a second thought. Now let's turn it to the situation I talked about at the very beginning of the video, which is playing any game that comes with a kernel level anti-cheat. First off, you have every reason on earth to be spooked by this level of access. Kernel mode meets God mode, and voluntarily downloading something on your computer that gives it the deepest level of system access possible is definitely a little bit frightening. But again, same question. What's the worst that could happen, and how likely is that? For the worst that could happen, well, this is really deep in my computer, so I guess the company that sold me the game or an outside hacking group who found a flaw in the anti-cheat can basically just look through all my files and all my passwords and even brick my computer. So again, that sounds pretty bad. But how likely is that? This is arguable, but I don't actually think it's likely at all. The idea of kernel level anti-cheat came on my radar originally when Valorant came out, and it seemed crazy at the time, but today, many games, some of which you've probably played without a second thought, have kernel level anti-cheat. From what I looked into, it seems like the big difference is that Valorant's boots on Windows and just runs in the background constantly, whereas the other games only are enabled if you're actually in game. But the point is, a lot of these games have this anti-cheat now. I did somewhat of a thorough search and I was actually only able to find 2 problems that concern kernel level anti-cheat. One with Street Fighter V and one with Genshin Impact. I'm not going to get into the full technical details here, and I'll leave some links for people who want to read more. But basically with Street Fighter V, Capcom updated the anti-cheat and there was a bug in it that basically let hackers give anything running on your computer kernel mode, aka God mode, if they wanted. So if you're a hacker, you could use that to give a virus God mode. Capcom realized that they made an error, they rolled it back, they put an apology post on Steam, everybody went on with their lives. In Genshin's case, hackers found a flaw in Genshin Impact's anti-cheat that let hackers kill other programs that are running on your computer, aka disable your antivirus, and then spread their own viruses. So basically using a flaw in Genshin's anti-cheat to hack you. So that's really bad. The fact that I found these at all show that this isn't some theoretical tinfoil hat concern. This is a real thing that happened, and it probably sucked for some people, but for all the games out today with kernel anti-cheat being played by millions and millions of players, going back however many handful of years, for me to only be able to find 2 problems basically tells me that this is a valid concern, but a relatively low likelihood one. Clearly, it's a really low sample size of just 2, but another thing I want to call out is that in both these situations, it wasn't the developer themselves, Capcom or whoever makes Genshin, was doing anything nefarious. It's that they made a programming error and an outside hacking group took advantage of it. I really don't think that a developer would have almost any incentive to purposely steal from their customers. They probably would get exposed, and that's the last time anybody would ever buy something from them again, and it would completely tarnish their reputation. And even if you were a video game developer and you wanted to steal from your customers, you really wouldn't need anti-cheat to do it. You could probably bundle a virus or some flaw in the game itself. The anti-cheat thing is just this unnecessary extra step. So all that is to say that what I'd really be worried about is an honest mistake by a developer that gets taken advantage of by an outside group. So what do? For me personally, I avoid Valorant just because I'm a little extra spooked by the fact that it's always running, even if I'm not in game, and there's plenty of other games for me to play that don't have this, so it's easy enough to just avoid Valorant. But again, I think that this is such a remote concern, and the odds of anything bad happening to me or to any one person specifically just aren't that high. So if you want to play Valorant or any other game, I would not fault you for that. I think that's a solid decision. I'm probably being a little bit paranoid. One other thing to also remember is to think about the specifics of your situation. The reason I don't want to give Valorant deep level access to my computer is just because there's stuff on it. If I had a dedicated computer that was only for gaming, or if the computer I use just somehow had no passwords or anything saved on it that I didn't care about getting hacked, then I would totally play Valorant on it, because who cares at that point? They just have nothing to lose. I'm a person who believes that no matter how hard you try, you're inevitably going to run into an issue. So I feel like it's better time spent to think through and prepare for a worst case scenario than it is to like obsessively try avoiding one at all costs. I think you'd be much better served using two-factor authentication where it's available, using a different password for every website that you go on, and backing up any important files in case it gets stolen or deleted. and also learning how to reinstall Windows. All those things are going to serve you way better and are probably time better spent than to turn every single game you install into like a giant research project. The last thing I'll say is that it's also very important to keep in mind what you're already doing and ask yourself if one more thing on top of that is really all that big of a deal. For starters, isolating your kernel from any and all tampering attempts is kind of an unrealistic goal to begin with. You probably have things running on it anyway. That does not mean that you have to cooperate and add one more thing to the list, but it does mean that if your idea to protect your computer is to keep your kernel this pristine, sacred realm, that probably is unrealistic. Your computer probably has a bunch of kernel mode drivers running on it already, and I would say that adding some rando hardware from a company you never heard of is probably riskier on its face than downloading something like Valorant. Also, high-profile data breaches, unfortunately, are not exactly rare these days. They happen to all sorts of companies, big and small, trusted and non-trusted, and you may already be affected by this, and sites like Have I Been Pwned are really good resources to check. So similar to keeping your kernel 100% squeaky clean, it's probably not realistic to somehow avoid ever having your data hacked in another company's data breach. That's probably a fool's errand itself. Again, I think it's better to reduce the blast zone and plan for the worst case scenario than to obsess over every last drop of your digital footprint. So anyway, just to wrap up, all I'm trying to say is that when I personally am faced with a decision point, the first thing I ask myself is, what am I being asked to give up or to share? And what am I supposed to be getting back in return for that? Is the risk worth it for the reward? Then to think through the risk, you think to yourself, well, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? And how likely really is that? And that's always a balance. If you just think of what's the worst case scenario or how likely is this situation to happen on its own, you could get kind of weird results. But for something like this, I see both sides. It's definitely spooky. And if you're not down, I totally see that. But I also think that it's a remote enough chance of being a problem that it's probably fine. Anyway, I really like talking about this stuff and learning how computers work. It's obviously a huge rabbit hole, so I'm gonna leave a bunch of links in the description, both to general computer stuff, kernel stuff, also more information about the Street Fighter hack and the Genshin Impact hack. Let me know your thoughts on anti-cheat, privacy, and risk reward in general. What's the limit for you? How do you feel about buying stuff online? How do you feel about downloading things that might have different levels of access? Or do you even read privacy statements, or do you just sort of click through that stuff? I definitely don't know as much about the privacy statement thing. That's definitely something you should talk to a lawyer about. I just know for me, I really like games like Elden Ring, so the fact that it has epic anti-cheat running and it only runs when the game is on, to me, it's worth the risk to be able to play something like that. But it might not be for everybody. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys soon.